Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of GeoSpace.
I'm your host Mohammed Salih, and I'm glad you are with us for the New Regions bi-weekly podcast, where we unpack the shifting landscape of Middle Eastern politics and geopolitics and the nitty and gritty of things. In today's episode, we are turning our attention once again to Syria, a topic we have revisited several times over the past few months, to look at the country's ongoing political transition and its broader trajectory since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in December last year. We'll touch on the recent elections, the lingering question of minority rights, and the evolving dynamics between the Kurds and the government in Damascus and the tensions in Suwaida, the Druze majority region in the southern part of the country. To help us make sense of all of this, I'm joined by Robin Yassin-Kassab, author of the novel The Road from Damascus and co-author of Burning Country, Syrians in Revolution and War. He is also the English language editor of the ISIS Prisons Museum and the Syria Prisons Museum, and associate editor of Critical Muslim. And he is currently working on a new book titled The Blood Between Us, about this pivotal year in Syria. Before we dive in, a quick reminder that you can find GeoSpace on the New Regions website under the Watch section, as well as on YouTube and SoundCloud. You can also explore more of our in-depth coverage on Syria at thenewregion.com. Robin, it's a pleasure to have you on GeoSpace. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me start with a more personal question first. The title of your past book, Burning Country, Syrians in Revolution and War, and the upcoming one, The Blood Between Us, are quite touching and revelatory at the same time of the pre- and post-Assad phases in Syria. What is the story that you, as a Syrian, are trying or have been trying to tell your readers with these books?
Well, the first one was the story of, as the subtitle says, Syrians in Revolution and War. It was the story of the revolution, and I and my co-author, Layla Ashami, we wanted to do two things with that book. The first thing is we wanted to allow Syrians themselves to speak. You know, we interviewed a lot of Syrians. We thought that a lot of people, especially in the West, but also in the Middle East, were writing about the Syrian revolution without talking to Syrians. You know, they were framing it into stories that they already understood about Sunni Shia or about Saudi Arabia and Iran or whatever, geopolitics, and not talking to the Syrians. So we wanted to give a story from the grassroots, and we wanted to put it into its full context. You know, how had this revolution come to be? How had the Assad regime come to be? What's the cultural and ethnic and political and sectarian background to all of this? And then the new book, The Blood Between Us, the aim there is to describe this year, 2025, in Syria. What's happening? What is this transition? What direction is Syria going in? And what is making the transition so difficult? And what's making it so difficult is that after 14 years of war, in which almost all the different communities have offended and upset each other, and the country has splintered into militias and zones of interest, how do you put all that back together with all of this blood in between people, all of this blood between, in some cases, between brothers in the same family? How do you reconcile Syrians? How do you make it a functioning state once again?
Right. I assume you have been back in Syria after the fall of Assad's regime, right?
Yeah, I went twice. I went in at the end of Ramadan and Eid, so that was March and April. And I went back for 3 weeks in July, August.
Right. Can you, describe the mood on the ground, on the street in Syria, with the country, having gone through 14 years of, extreme destruction, war, suffering, and all of that? How did you find the mood on the street?
I found it quite different in the two visits. The first visit was, as I said, in March and April, and there was still amongst most people, it's not clearly aligned by sect, but we can say that the most Sunni Muslims were euphoric. They were still euphoric that at last the war seemed to be over and Assad had finally gone. And even amongst many members of the minorities, we'll get into this and how problematic these terms are, but the minorities, the sectarian minorities, even amongst some of those people who are worried in general, even then they were worried. They were wondering what was coming next. They were worried about it. But even most of them, I think, felt a sense of relief that at last the war maybe is over and the Assad regime has gone. So even it's not true that the Alawites from Assad's homeland near in Rif Ladia in the countryside of Latakia all love him. Most of them didn't. Most of them are relieved that he is gone, even if they're very worried about what's coming next. The second visit, there was less euphoria. I arrived actually just as it was all blowing up in Sweden. In the first days that I had planned to go down to Sweden to visit friends, and I wasn't able to go down because the road was closed and there was terrible fighting and massacres happening there. In Damascus, there was bombing. The Israelis bombed right in the center of Damascus. So I think everybody felt upset, whether they were with the government or against the government. The general mood was much more tense, much more upset, much more worried. And there was a lot more criticism as well of the new government. There was a lot more criticism from everybody, not just from the minorities. There were people worried about the economy, people who had hoped that even in just 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, things would start improving economically, and they're not. And people worried about all the militias everywhere, people kind of realizing, okay, the old regime has gone. Hopefully the war is over or at least calming down. That's great. But a realization that the country's in a real mess and it's going to be very difficult to put it back together.
Right. I assume, Syria has come quite a long way since Assad's fall. How would you assess, some of the key moments of this transition since December? The appointment of a new president, the parliamentary elections that were held in early October, and before that in March, the constitutional declaration that was put out by President Ahmed al-Sharaa. As a Syrian and also as someone who has been writing about the contemporary history of the country, how would you assess the transition so far since the fall of the Assad regime?
I think I don't know where to start. There's so much to talk about. It has not been ideal. I think that there are serious problems with it. There are problems with the centralization of power in the president. I understand why a lot of Syrians like that. A lot of Syrians are very happy with Ahmed al-Sharaa. And a lot of international powers seem to be very happy, and understandably, that there is somebody who seems to be very intelligent. He seems to be, whatever his past was, he seems to be very adaptable. He's able to come out of his combat jacket and put on a suit and tie, to trim his beard a little bit, and to go to the United Nations and to meet Trump and to meet Putin. And he's been very reassuring to the international community that he's going to fight ISIS, that He's not going to allow attacks on Israel. He's not going to allow attacks on Iraq through the Syrian-Iraqi border. So, on the one hand, it's great. It's good that we've got such a intelligent, skillful political actor at the top at this difficult moment. I agree that it's great. On the other hand, I think it's really dangerous that one man, whoever he is concentrating so much power in his own hands, particularly when you look at Syria's history. We've just had a 14-year revolutionary war and lots of other kinds of war at the same time because we couldn't get rid of this president with an enormous amount of power in his hands. So I find that this a bit worrying. I think that a lot of it has looked like going through the motions. The national dialogue was not really a national dialogue. The constitutional declaration it had some good things in it, but overall it's a little bit disappointing. It's a very complex picture. I mean, I think on the level of local government in Syria, it's a bit more positive. I think there are a lot of local councils and organizations, civil bodies, which local communities have set up, and they are being allowed to function. So it's a mixed picture. It could have been much worse. It could have been somewhat better also.
Sure. Given what, Syrians have gone through, the current generations, nearly 6 decades of authoritarian rule by the Assad family, the father and the son, and 14 years of devastating war, either really an appetite, you mentioned local councils, either an appetite on the part of average Syrian, for some sort of genuine political participation, or do they really just want someone to, come take care of the mess, put the country on the path to economic recovery and reconstruction, given the, immense physical destruction that was caused over the past 14 years. Do Syrians really, after, having gone through all of this, at this point, do they prioritize political participation, a, sort of bottom-up model, or do they just want someone to, come and fix the country for them after all that they went through?
Again, it's a difficult question to answer because I think both at once. I think there is a strong desire amongst Syrians for everything just to be okay and for the new guy to be good and for us to support the government and just everything to be solved. And people who want to, but there's a lot of people who just want to believe that everything's going to be okay. And it's very understandable. And I'm not going to criticize those people because I have been sitting comfortably in Scotland throughout this 14 years, apart from a couple of visits very fast into the north of Syria, and I have not had to live through hunger and fear and devastation and homelessness and all the things that Syrians have had to live through. So I can completely understand. I'm not going to criticize it. However, I don't think that, the people that just want to believe that everything's going to be okay and the leaders are going to solve the problems, I think they're going to be very disappointed quite soon. And that's not necessarily a criticism of the leaders. It's just because no leaders could solve the problems that Syria has quickly and easily. The problems are enormous. And they're problems on every level, economically, political problems, the problems of security, the fact that there are all of these different militias not really answerable to any one leader, that there are so many different ideas of what justice is. There are so many different villages and families that want justice from each other. And there isn't a mechanism to solve those problems in a way that's going to satisfy everybody. So these immediate problems are facing people, and people inevitably are going to start organizing themselves politically to try to deal with these problems. And we see that already, even though there is a phenomenon of people not wanting to criticize the leaders and thinking that criticism is treason and all of this nonsense, even so, in Damascus and Aleppo and everywhere throughout the country, we're seeing almost daily protests about all kinds of things. About, a new rule was brought in Damascus, I think, banning motorbikes or a certain type of motorbike. So all the people who had that kind of motorbike had a protest outside the Belediyeh. This is in the culture now, protesting and organizing with other people on Facebook, on social media, in your local community, electing local councils. This happened immediately that the regime fell. Communities all over the country started electing or choosing people to be their representatives in their local area and setting up local committees. And they had to do it because there still is really no state. It's slowly maybe beginning to form, but still it's not really there. So if a neighborhood if they want a neighborhood watch, there's a lot of crime. So people are getting together to kind of defend their areas against criminals. There are lawyers who are getting together to offer legal advice to people because nobody at the moment knows what the law is. There's, on every level, people are organizing, and that's something that happens naturally, whether people want to believe that the leaders are going to solve all the problems or not. They find themselves having to organize to solve their daily problems, and that's happening.
Right. I think on the question of political organization, we should, all recall that Syrians did a great job of that early on during the revolution, the uprising, with the massive protests in different cities across the country, which unfortunately, were suppressed very violently and then, led to the basically armed confrontation between the state and the rebels that emerged after the protests. But on the question of justice, since transitional justice is really such an important part of this broader transition or transitional process in Syria, what is your sense of how, the average Syrian understands justice in this case? Do they, the tendency for the most part toward, we shouldn't take out whatever grievances we might have had against Assad, for example, on the people from, his Alawite community. We should let law and order to emerge and to take care of this through legal means for us, or, either for the most part, a tendency for taking matters into their hands and trying to deliver justice in whatever way that they deem fit.
I mean, I have no doubt that the large majority of Syrians want a system of law and order, and they understand that there is a clear connection between a system of law and order and stability in the country and safety and security. Now, the problem at the moment is that there isn't a clear system of law and order. A lot of Assadist criminals have been arrested, but the transitional justice, if there is a kind of comprehensive transitional justice system, we can't see it. We don't know what it is. There isn't enough transparency. I mean, of course, again, we have to recognize that these guys who were running a militia in Idlib and suddenly they find themselves running a whole country and being in charge of things like transitional justice. I know it's really difficult. I understand that. The old legal system of Assad is, corrupt and can't be trusted. And many of the judges and lawyers in that system are themselves perhaps criminals or people that should be on trial. So it takes a long time working with international experts, working with NGOs, working with Syrians who've been working on these issues for the last 14 years and longer in some cases. But I fear there isn't enough transparency. There isn't enough of a desire from the government they want to be in control of the process. and I think they should allow civilians to be in control of it. They want to limit it just to Assad, and I think it should be larger than that. I think that we also need to have a transitional justice which calls to account ISIS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham themselves, who they committed crimes, and they need to, I'm not saying necessarily that we want, I'm not asking for something unrealistic like Ahmed al-Sharaa to be sent to prison. I don't want that to happen. That would be a disaster for Syria, even if it would be a kind of justice in a way for some people. But there needs to be some kind of recognition that, yes, we have done wrong too. Everybody did wrong. All the communities have got reason to be angry with all the other communities. We all need to take responsibility, all of us. The Alawites who, they are not to be blamed for the Assad family and the Assad gangsters. And so many Sunnis, for example, were staffed the Assad regime. But it's true that maybe most Alawis had an uncle or a cousin or a father in the security forces. And we have to recognize that. And ISIS came from parts of the Sunni community. And the SDF Kurds, in some cases, committed offences against against non-Kurds or Kurds who were not members of the SDF. It's all very complicated. So we need a system which is not run by one militia. We need a comprehensive, transparent system which brings together experts. And I think if the people if they saw evidence of a system like that, if they saw evidence that all criminals were being punished, whoever they were, whatever background they're from, whether they're Assadists or revolutionaries or Sunnis or Alawites or Kurds or Arabs, if you're a criminal, you will be put on trial and you will be punished in some way. If people saw that, they would feel less need to take the law into their own hands and go and commit revenge attacks, which very quickly threatened to spill over into general sectarian fighting, which threatens the peace for everybody.
Right. Apart from this institutional aspect of, delivering justice, is there sort of any grassroots community to community movement on that? And by that, I mean, for example, members of different communities getting together, reflecting over what happened, not just during the past 14 years, but the past several decades, and coming to, some sort of a genuine people to people grassroots level understanding of, what justice would look like in the new Syria and how the new Syria needs to be governed.
Yes, there is. And I don't know enough about it, to be honest, so I can't give you a full answer. But I have heard from people that such initiatives are happening. I mean, I've heard about, a group of Idlibis have gone to the coast to have meetings with people, that after the massacres in March on the coast, there were delegations went from different parts of the country and often led by women, to kind of, to make human contact. And they were going to give supplies and to see how they could help emotionally as well. I heard about, I don't know at the moment in the south, in Sweden, it's quite very difficult at the moment, but I know that earlier there were delegations, kind of mixed delegations from Dara, where most people are Sunni, and Sweden, where most people are Druze, were getting together and doing joint activities and so on. So there is some of this. And I would like to learn more about it. And it's really tremendously important. There's also joint work, like there's been a lot of forest fires in Syria recently. And I remember seeing very heartwarming videos where there was some Sunni guys from Hama with their arms around some Alawi guys from the coast. And they were saying, we're Sunnis and Alawis and we're all Syrians and we're all working together here. We're all brothers. So there is a desire amongst the people, just as there's a desire amongst lots of traumatized, angry people to have revenge. And there's a lot of identity politics and a lot of disinformation and a lot of discourse about the other, which demonizes the other. A lot of that is happening. But at the same time, there really is also a strong desire amongst a lot of people for us to get over these problems and to rebuild the common Syrian identity.
Well, thanks for pointing that out. That's really interesting, to be able to see the complexity of the picture and not to, reduce the situation to one or two simple stereotypes, which is unfortunately what tends to happen during times and moments like this, especially when it comes to the media coverage of these places. I was curious, what is your personal vision as Robin Yassin-Kassab, someone who hails from Syria, who obviously cares a lot about Syria, has written about it. What kind of Syria would you like to emerge after, several decades of pain and suffering? What kind of Syria would you like to see in terms of the system, political system, economic system, socially?
I mean, I feel slightly. I don't know. I feel slightly. Are you there? You kind of froze. I wonder if I lost the. No, I didn't. Forgive me. I feel. Because I am a British Syrian, because I've got a British passport, and I've spent most of my life in other countries, with lots of always closely connected to Syria and with a close family in Syria and some years living in Syria. But I kind of feel like, I, for example, I didn't complain about the Assad regime until the revolution broke out in 2011. I thought it's kind of not quite my business. I would speak about it in private. As soon as the people went out into the street, and it's like, okay, the people are asking for democracy and freedom, and I will write about what they are asking for, and I will try and amplify their voices. I take my lead from the people who live there, who can't get out, who have to live there, who have to make a life there. But of course I have opinions, and I do feel like of course I do, and I have close family there, and it's a country which I do feel is one of my countries, and I want to go there and be comfortable there, and I want my friends and the people I love to be comfortable there. So firstly, I want a peaceful country. I want a country in which people feel safe. They're not scared of their neighbors. They're not scared of sudden outbreaks of war, or they're not scared of being arrested and tortured. These basic things which we would all want for anybody that we care about. That's what I want. I would like it to be a democratic country. I don't want it to be a dictatorship. I would like it to be, the term decentralization is used a lot. People talk la merkezia in Arabic. It's a very controversial term at the moment, and maybe most Syrians seem to be allergic to the phrase. And I think that is because of the prevalence of identity politics at the moment, and because people are upset that the country is split into zones of influence, and that it's almost as if you need a visa to go from one part of the country to another. You're under a different jurisdiction. People don't like that, so they like the idea of centralization. But I think an intelligent form of decentralization actually could make Syria a stronger nation. I think it could provide a mechanism whereby all the different communities could live together. And it doesn't have to be ethnic or sectarian. It could be regional. And that could mean, for example, in the parts of Syria where you have large Kurdish populations, those people could decide locally that we're going to teach Kurdish in our schools, or we're going to celebrate Nowruz, things like that. We're going to have a slightly different cultural set of cultural and social activities and events and values than people in Damascus or in Deir ez-Zor or in Tartus. And I think that's absolutely fine. And they could vote for a Kurdish mayor, and they could vote for a Kurdish local council. And they, in Tartus, where you've got lots of Alawites and lots of Christians and so on, they could vote there that we're going to have bars, we're going to have nightclubs, because the people in this area are happy to do that. And that could even be great for, strict Muslims. Sorry, that could be great for people who live in Deir ez-Zor, or they live in Idlib, or they live in Hama. And they think at the weekend, I'm going to go to Tartus because I want to go to a bar. And that's great. They could be happy in Syria. And that decentralization could allow the different ways of life in Syria to coexist quite well, I think. There we go. I've spoken a lot about what I would like.
Right. Well, I was just curious from your interactions with, average Syrians, friends, family, the ordinary folks on the street. Did you have the sense that the Syrians, at least, the one that you were dealing with, were kind of receptive to idea of some form of decentralization being, a better path for the future of the country, or no, they're against it because of those reasons that you mentioned?
Well, I think if you have a conversation with them, in the first minute, and you say, what about decentralization? And they go, la, 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 but then, they don't like the idea at all. And you say, why? And they say, because that means that the Kurds are going to steal part of Syria, and the Alawis are going to steal their part, and and Iran will turn that part into a garrison, and the Israelis are going to take Sweden. And you say, I don't want Iran or Israel to come and take any part of Syria. I'm not talking about separatism. I'm talking about a mechanism whereby different communities can make lots of decisions locally, but we can all be part of one central nation. And the borders will all be guarded by, the Syrian army. And then they start saying, okay, maybe yes, maybe that could work. So I think that I think most people are not receptive to it at the moment, but if we have a proper conversation about it, they could be. And when you point out to them that's in effect what happened during the revolution, that was what was so successful about the revolution, as well as all the disasters of the revolution. The successful element of it was that many communities were able to run their own affairs in a very effective way. So many communities which would not have survived in war conditions at all, but they did survive because they elected their own local council and they did things in their own way, which suited them. And I think that's great. I think for example, Kurdish communities in parts of the north of Syria, I would agree with a lot of the critics of the SDF and the PYD and the PKK and so on. They did a lot of things wrong, but I'm not talking about specific militias or political parties controlling something. I'm talking about the principle that, for example, Kurdish people in an area where they form a majority or a large proportion of the population, if they want to decide to educate children in Kurdish, they should be allowed to do that. And that would allow them to be happy as Kurds and as Syrians at the same time. That would make most Kurds think, I don't need to join a political party which wants to fight against the Syrian government because I'm happy being a Kurd within this Syrian situation.
Right. What about at the level of the authorities in Damascus? We have seen a lot of hesitation to accept political pluralism in the new Syria. We don't see any organized political parties taking part in any sort of formal political process. They are also, very adamant on avoiding using the term democracy or its variations. I personally haven't seen, for example, President Ahmed use the term. He might have at an interview, but the fact that as someone who follows the developments in Syria pretty closely, having missed that, I think that also, tells us something about the direction of the new system. How, how does this aversion to accepting some sort of a politically pluralistic system is going to affect the course of events and the way that the new Syria is going to be shaped, in your opinion?
Well, they are centralizing power. We can't ignore the fact that they are centralizing power. They need to be pressured. And I don't think it's just them. I think anybody that, the job of people in power is to stay in power. even in Western democracy, I say even in Western democracies, because the Western democracies are not in good shape at the moment at all. Democracy is in question here in the West increasingly, but even in Western democracies, people in power become dictatorial. The longer that they're in power, the more dictatorial they become. It's the way that people in power think. They try to stop opposition and problems and people getting in their way. So they have to be resisted. There needs to be either very strong institutions, and Syria doesn't have any institutions really at the moment, or there has to be massive popular pressure to push them in the right direction. And we haven't seen enough of this yet, although I did say that there is a culture of protest, that there are protests about individual issues all the time. But it hasn't yet turned into a kind of organized political opposition. And we need that. We really do. We need, it's very urgent to have a political parties law, which we don't have yet. We need a law which allows political parties to form and for them to have a bank account and for them to register. We need a leftist party and a liberal party, and we need, I don't know, maybe a different kind of Islamist party to compete with this kind of Islamism that we have at the moment. All of this needs to happen, and it needs to happen quite quickly. And I think it will happen, but there are not enough signs of it happening yet. There are some signs. I mean, there was something called the Mubadara al-Miyawiyya, the centenary initiative after Sweda. A group of revolutionary names got together and they came up with this initiative, which basically said to the government, please expand yourself. Please, the government needs to have more civilians in it, in making decisions. And I agree with that. I think that these people are probably better than you would have expected them to be. But they are still militiamen, and they represent the Sunni identity politics. And if we want to put Syria back together, multicultural Syria, which is not just Sunni Arabs, it's all, and even the Sunni Arabs, most Sunni Arabs are not necessarily Islamists or Salafists. There's a whole range of opinion amongst the Sunni Arab community. And I don't think they are particularly well represented just by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And therefore, I think opposition will come, but it's not coming fast enough. I agree with you.
You pointed out a very important point, that we are not really seeing, at least this is my sense, that we are not seeing the diversity of Syrian political spectrum so far, at least in terms of what we are, getting in the media. And so, especially when it comes to liberal and left-leaning Syrians, their voices seem quiet these days. But I was just wondering if, there is any organized liberal or left-leaning movements or figures on the ground with the potential to shape a meaningful platform, a political platform or alternative. And by alternative, I don't mean in the sense of, toppling the existing regime and, engaging in some sort of revolution, but even if a reform-oriented, political voice in the current political landscape of Syria. Are there any such groups and figures with potential today?
Not really, no. Not really, not yet. There are, because I know of a group of leftist Syrians, many of whom live outside, who are working on a statement at the moment to kind of try and gather that they haven't yet published it, but they're working on a statement around which they're trying to gather, they will try to gather support. This kind of activity is happening. It's quite small. It's quite low level. There are problems in the way of it. There are other things, like I was talking to Mazen Ghariba from the London School of Economics. He's originally from Homs. I was talking to him the other day, and he was talking about how the lawyers' union in Homs is really very active, and they're talking about human rights, and they've elected a human rights officer, and they're, kind of pushing back at the government about various things. In Homs, apparently, there's a lot of activity against the governor. People don't hate the governor. They think he's a nice guy, but they don't think he knows what he's doing. And Mazen was telling me that he thinks that feeling is because they weren't consulted in appointing him. So all of this stuff is going on, but it's not yet in the shape of, parties and clear leaders and so on. And I wish there are leaders. There are people like Mu'azz al-Khatib, for example, who at one point led the Syrian coalition, the opposition. He was once the imam in the Umayyi mosque, the Umayyad mosque. He's a big Damascus Sunni figure, but he is not happy at all with the people running things at the moment. He's from a very different kind of Sunni background from Ahmed al-Sharaa and al-Assad Shaybani. There's Ghassan Aboud, the media guy who owns a TV channel. There's Ayman Asfari, the businessman, who is he's one potential voice of liberal Syrians, who want a liberal system, or a liberal social democratic system. Any of those three men could become the leader of a new party, but it's all kind of going on behind closed doors at the moment, and it hasn't yet concretized. I'm waiting. I'm impatiently, and I hope it happens quickly, because the longer that these people are allowed to consolidate power, the more difficult it will be to put them under pressure and to create a larger space. So there we go. And then there are counter currents. There is this, unfortunately, you see it very strongly on social media. There is this kind of takhween, yani, if you are opposing the government, therefore you are a traitor, which is the habit of mind that we had from the Assad regime. This is what Syrians were brought up to. This was drummed into them. If you oppose the leader, you are working for the enemies of the state. You're working for Israel. You're working for Saddam Hussein or the Americans or whoever the enemy of the day was. And the same mentality exists, unfortunately, amongst some people who were revolutionaries. And now that they've got a Sunni leader or a non-Assad leader, they're suddenly doing the same thing, that and no, we fought a revolution in order to be able to criticize, in order to be able to disagree. It's not an insult to the leaders to disagree with them. It's not, I am somebody who, if you'd asked me a year ago, or at least 2 years ago, do you want Ahmed al-Sharaa and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to come to power in Damascus? I would have said absolutely not. These guys are Salafi jihadis and they cannot run Syria. It would be a disaster. I don't want them to be in power. But things have happened the way they have happened. The Assad regime collapsed. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was very intelligent. It managed to moderate itself, not enough, but it did moderate itself. It's very different from where it was when it began. And it was because it was very intelligent, it was able to inherit power when the regime collapsed. And here is where we are. And I'm not suggesting, I don't want them to just leave. I'm not suggesting let's have another revolution, let's get rid of Ahmed al-Sharaa, because I know that the other option here is chaos, We don't want chaos. We don't want to go back to war. So we want a gentle democratization.
It's like, I assume, part of the reason for why these liberal and leftist groups or figures not having much of a prominent role on the ground is that the events of the past 14 years in particular played an important role in terms of eroding the social base for these kind of movements and groups to emerge, right? Like the middle class, given the tremendous amount of destruction that we saw on the ground. Do you think that's one of the reasons, that given the transformation of the Syrian society as a result of the past 14, 15 years of conflict, there isn't, at the moment at least, much of a social base that would buy into this kind of ideology and discourse?
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth in that, because if you think about it, where are the original revolutionaries? Where are the leaders of civil society who created the local councils and the coordination committees and the civil activists? Unfortunately, most of them are dead or disappeared or in Europe or in Istanbul struggling to survive. We dedicated our first book on Syria, Burning Country, to Razan Zaytouni, who's almost definitely was killed by Jaish al-Islam in Douma, or she certainly disappeared. We don't know what happened to her. Ra'ed Faris, I can go through a list of great revolutionaries, great people who should be here to lead us now and to set up political parties and political movements and to lead demonstrations and so on, and they're dead. And unfortunately, that's true. And there is no middle class, and people are just focused to a large extent on survival. So yeah, absolutely, it's going to take a lot of time. And but as I say, I do think it will come, because the practicalities, the fact that there isn't much of a state, there isn't yet. Even if these people who are there now want to build a dictatorship, they haven't managed to build it yet. It will take them a while to build it. And in the meantime, people need to organize just to kind of deal with their daily problems. So I think it will come, but it's a race against time.
Right. And how do you think the policies of the regional countries and global powers, in particular the U.S., is contributing toward shaping this future Syria, which is slowly emerging? Are they, pushing Syria in a more pluralistic, representative, democratic way, or, that's not something they really care about? They just want to stable Syria so that the new ISIS won't emerge and pose a major regional and global security risk to them?
I think they've got very straightforward. Firstly, they want Ahmed al-Sharaa to promise them that he's going to fight ISIS. And he's already done that. He did that years ago. He did that when he was in Idlib before he came to Damascus. They've been working with him for years, which is why they didn't panic when he came to power. And after that, they don't want refugees pouring out of Syria. Particularly Europe, they want the most of the refugees to go back to Syria. So again, they are thinking, let's deal with this guy because this is our best hope, or maybe the only hope, for getting a government in Syria which will stabilize things and stop people coming out of the country. They want Captagon, drug smuggling to stop from Syria. Syria is a huge problem for the Gulf and for Egypt and for Jordan because of all the narcotics coming out of Syria. And again, he's given them assurances and he is working hard. His government is working hard to try and stop that. Those are the basic things they want out of him, and they're getting that out of him. Maybe they could push him a bit harder on things like transitional justice, democracy, and being good with minorities. But at the same time, I'm not demanding that they do that because I want Syrians to do that themselves. And I don't think that actually Western countries or especially Arab countries are really in a position to be lecturing the Syrians or teaching the Syrians how to do it in that respect. I want Syrians to be able to do that. And I want Syrians to see that it's in everybody's interests for everybody in Syria to be safe.
And on the question of minorities, and I think we are both using the term minorities for the lack of a better term. Some people might use minoritized communities, or we could say, ethnic and religious communities in Syria. This question has really come back to the forefront in Syrian politics in a way that is perhaps, that hasn't been perhaps like that since the era of the French Mandate. How do you think, the Sharaa government has handled this issue so far? And if they are, on the path toward handling this in a way, that would prevent some sort of, new round of major conflict erupting in the country?
They haven't dealt with it very well, obviously. And Sweden, in practical terms, is so much worse than Latakia, the coast. That sounds like I'm prejudiced against Alawites. I'm not. It's equally terrible for when people die, whatever their community they're from. But when it happened on the coast in March, okay, it was maybe easy to give the Syrian leadership the benefit of the doubt that they didn't expect when they mobilized the militias and the Sunni community and they allowed people in mosques to call for jihad. They didn't expect that there would be these massacres. And of course, there is blood between the Alawi community and the Sunni community because of the war. So, maybe that was an error or a mistake. But when a similar thing happened 3 months later in Sweden, it's just much more difficult to give them the benefit of the doubt. Again, it seems that they mobilized one community against another community, which is the opposite of nation building. And I'm trying, I'm writing a book about it at the moment. So I've been trying to work out, does Ahmed al-Sharaa, does the leadership want these sectarian massacres to take place? Or are they not in control? They're trying to stop it happening, and the answer, it depends on who you talk to. I've spoken to a lot of experts who tell me that I should still give him the benefit of the doubt, who still say that although they say that there is an army and there's an interior ministry and there's a defense ministry, really it's just still militias and they are very disorganized and there is no discipline. And he does genuinely want to rule the country and he understands that he can't rule it if there's these outbreaks of sectarian massacre every few months. Maybe, I don't know. I really don't know what's going on in his mind. But I think the answer has to be the same, whether he's guilty or he's innocent and trying to do the right thing. He and his militiamen are not capable of taking control of the very explosive situation at the moment with minorities. And they're not capable of providing security to minorities and to other people as well, like the Bedouin, who are another kind of minority. The Bedouin in Sweden are also in a terrible situation, whoever's fault that is. So the answer must be to expand the government, to bring civilians in, to bring national figures into decision-making roles. People like Burhan Ghaliun, who's a very old man and might not want to do it, but people like Muaz al-Khatib, who I was talking about before, people who are more like national figures, who don't represent a militia, who don't represent Sunni identity politics. Having more of those people. We have one or two. We have Hind Qabawat, who's a Christian, very good, efficient Minister of Social Affairs. We have some great people in there, but we need more people like that to give all sectors of society more trust in the state so that we can all move forward together.
On that question of, intent versus capacity that you alluded to when it comes to the treatment of the minorities by the government, whether, the massacres on the coast and in Syria have happened because that was the intent of the government or because they didn't have the capacity to really prevent that from happening, given how chaotic things are still at this stage and, the existence of numerous armed groups and militias. Does it, when this question is brought up, which is a very fair question to debate and discuss, like my reaction to that is always, does this really matter to a member of a minority community on the ground, who has been or feels is going to be, facing some sort of massacre at some point? Does it matter to these people these kind of objective debates of whether it's about intent or capacity, or the fault really lies somewhere else, in a way that it doesn't really make much of a difference for the average minority individual who might get killed by a zealous militia member or whatever?
No, for them it doesn't matter. I mean, for them, they need security. They need to feel safe. They need the people in charge to make much better speeches than they have made, and to address them directly and to say, "I am on your side. This country belongs to you," and not just going through the motions every so often, maybe for the foreign consumption. They need Ahmed al-Sharaa to stand up and be really courageous and address his own people and say, this kind of, sectarian killing is wrong. It's terrible. It's a crime. They need to see people being punished who've done that. It's very difficult. And I've been told again by experts have told me that more people are being punished, more Sunni militiamen are being punished than we see. But they're not doing it in public. And they're not doing it in public because they're terrified of a response from their own base. They're worried first and foremost about upsetting their own Sunni militiamen and creating an ISIS type. This already exists. There was the attack on the church in Duela. And some Syrians seem to think that was Ahmed al-Sharaa and that was his people doing that. And I really don't think it was. I really don't think Ahmed al-Sharaa wanted the church attack, because it's really bad for him. It brings him, especially they're Christians, so it brings really bad attention from the American right wing and the Islamophobes in the West. So it's really bad for him to have a church being blown up. But at the same time, he didn't dare go to the church himself and give his condolences to the people in the church. And that may well be because the organization which blew up the church are people who have left Hayat Tahrir al-Sham because they're angry that Ahmed al-Sharaa is too nice to the minorities. And he's being too liberal, and he's meeting the Americans, and the women in Damascus are not yet being forced to wear niqabs or hijabs. So they're angry about that. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to know what the answer is. But again, I must say the people on the ground in Sweda or in Rif Latakia or whatever, or the Kurds as well in the northeast, they need much more practical reassurance than they've got at the moment, and they need institutional reassurance. They need the government to be expanded. They need some form of decentralization so that they feel that they can run their own affairs, so that even if the people in Damascus want to be Islamic zealots, they don't have to do that in their neighborhoods. They need these reassurances, and I wish they were getting more of them. I think it would be good for everybody, including for the Islamic zealots, if we could, have that, so that we could all move together as a country and everybody could express themselves in their own way.
Right. We've gone a little bit over time, with the usual time slot for this episode. But let me ask you one final question, Robin. Do you see a future where, for example, the more liberal and left-minded forces within the, minority communities, whether the Kurds and others, being in, some form of alliance with the more liberal and left-minded Syrians from, the Sunni majority parts of the country?
Yeah, definitely. I really strongly feel that should happen. I'm waiting for this to happen. As I said, the last time that I was in Damascus and in Latakia, but especially in Damascus, kind of middle class Damascenes, Sunni Muslims are not happy about militia rule, and they may be Sunni Muslims, but they are very proud to live in a country which is multicultural. They're very aware. I think a lot of Syrians, maybe the majority of Syrians, even with all the trauma and anger, it's complicated. The same person can have different attitudes at the same time. The same person can be sectarian against his neighbor, but also believe in liberal values. It's complicated. But I do think that maybe the majority of Syrians are very happy to live in a multicultural society, and they want to. So it should be possible to build bridges between different communities, between the minorities and the majority, and to create a normal kind of, when I say normal, a kind of democratic system in which you could have this ruling government and you can have an opposition, and we can argue we can arrive at a situation where we have our arguments in politics, in words, and at the ballot box, and not with guns and bombs. That's the aim.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's conversation. Robin, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show and hearing your thoughtful insights on Syria and the evolving dynamics in the country. Robin Yassin-Kassab is a Syrian-British author. He has written the novel The Road from Damascus and has co-authored the book Burning Country, Syrians in Revolution and War. And to our listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of GeoSpace.